I'll just look at the name so we can quote it so people will know what I'm talking about. Oh God, I forgot how long this name was. In English, it means enlightenment for the intelligent on the means of deliverance in warfare. A very useful thing to know. In Arabic, it is Tabsirat Arbab al-Albab fi Kaifiyat an-Najat fi fil Khurub. And the author was Mahdi ibn Ali Tasusi, Tarsus being a city in southern Anatolia, northern Syria. He has a section on archery in it. It's been translated into French by Lamont Baudot, or is it Baudot, not Lamont? Anyway, I'll see if I got a reference to it here. No, I can't find it. But the archery section is really interesting because it refers to things outside of Cairo. I mean, it was written in the 1190s, early 1190s. Yeah. So it's a very early book. And it refers to people in Khorasani, Karluks, who were Turkish tribes, no?
Yeah.
Who were working as for the Razmafzar. And it's got stuff about how they laid siege to fortresses. They would kneel down with their shields on their backs and draw their bows out of sight and then suddenly pop around and shoot. Well, you know, this is good for a skillful archer, but it's a hell of a lot easier if you take a crossbow and have a shield like a mantlet or a pavis or something and hide behind that and then just pop out when you want to shoot.
Yeah.
This was on both sides in the Crusades. Richard the Lionheart was famous for using a crossbow to shoot people on the walls of Acre.
Yeah.
He also is famous for being shot and killed by a crossbow in France.
I just want to say, when I was in Rouen, you know, his heart is kept in Cathedral of Rouen, and then I read this story about that. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a strange fellow, was Richard. But see, this thing was, it's not like the crossbow was unknown. When Anna Komnena wrote a history of her father Alexios, the Byzantine emperor, she wrote a section on crossbows, Frankish crossbows in particular, which I think in Greek they called sangris or sargris, which is speculated comes from the Persian charkh.
Ah, charkh, yes.
But be that as may, she was talking about Western crossbows, and she was talking about their great penetrative power and punching through stones and all this kind of stuff. But we know what they were like from archaeological finds, and they really weren't that powerful. One wonders if what was impressing people was that anybody could shoot one. If you read the reports of the monks that the Pope sent to the Mongol Great Khan, one of them was quite military in his orientation, and he made the point that the Mongols fear our crossbows and we should have more crossbow armed men and all this kind of stuff. Sounds good, but the crossbows, when he was writing that, only had about half the range of the Mongol bows, so you can't really say that that would be true. The Chinese crossbows used at the same time had very long ranges.
Oh.
And maybe the kind of what the Mongols said about the Chinese and crossbows as a general subject was fortuitously converted into saying, oh, all crossbows are like that. Our crossbows are good crossbows, therefore they're like that too, and they'll be frightened of them. Nobody's going to ride up to a group of crossbowmen and not take notice of them, because they do have this ability to shoot quite accurately in their range. There's a point made by quite a few experts on crossbows. I'm thinking particularly of Patterson in his book on the crossbows, which was published posthumously and wasn't quite complete. But he makes the point that a crossbow with its stock, in European crossbows, and this is shown in Oriental paintings too. This is particularly the Mamluk paintings, that the stock was put on the shoulder, and the hand was forward like that. The thumb, the top of the thumb there was lined up. It actually, sometimes they had little grooves with places to put your thumb as the back sight, and the point of the arrow was the front sight. So you aimed like that, or we aimed like that basically, pulled the trigger, and you had a front and a back sight, and it was great. Problem was, this worked up to about between 30 and 60 meters, because once you got past that, you had to lift the crossbow up. The crossbow stock was about that square, and the bow stuck out sideways, which meant you can't see your target anymore. And a lot of people say, well, you can hold it like this and shoot in volleys at distance and that. But the problem with that is there are no crossbows from the Middle Ages that had any form of back sight aside from the rest of the thumb. And that was late. So they didn't, if they had thought of this, they would have made some kind of structure so you could aim it. I mean, you see in pictures from war zones, people with AK-47s or whatever, putting the gun up over the wall and pulling the trigger on full automatic and just spraying bullets everywhere. We don't do that with pre-automatic weapons because you've actually got to pull the trigger each time, or in a crossbow, you've got to reload it and pull the trigger, reload it and pull the trigger, reload it and pull the trigger. So this kind of thing is, you've got to separate modern methods of warfare from old methods of warfare.
Yeah.
When you had a crossbow and it took you 10 or 20 seconds to load it, or longer if it got a cranquin in the European style, then each shot's got to count. And you might say, you might learn that if you put the stock of your crossbow there and hold it like this and aim with the top edge of the stock, you might be able to hit things at a given distance. You might practice to do that, but there's no documentation of that. So you can't say people did this. The idea that, say, like in the siege of Smyrna by Timur, one of the paintings, excuse me, for the Zafarnameh, one of the Zafarnamehs done by his descendants, shows this siege, shows people up in the towers shooting crossbows, shows people down on the ground shooting crossbows. The bows are all highly developed composites, not like the European ones. It's unlikely that the, I think it was the Hospitallers held Smyrna, had converted to Oriental crossbows, but it's quite likely that the siege engineers that Timur brought with him did have Oriental crossbows. And the artist was painting what he thought crossbow was. He painted in the trigger, but he painted it the same color as the stock. So it just looked like part of the stock. So maybe he'd seen a crossbow or had one described to him, but he knew what bows looked like.
Do we have any surviving example of Oriental crossbow in any museum?
I think there might be. I think there might be an Andalusian one. I think I saw that in a article in Gladius or something a long time ago. I'm pretty certain an Andalusian one has survived. There's the bow from Aleppo, which almost certainly is a European-made crossbow bow of the 12th or 13th century.
And the bow arms, were they, do you think they were made the same of composite nature? I mean, crossbow arms, I'm sorry, the same as a bow arm?
Well, reading Taibuka and looking at the illustrations in the Hidayatarami, yes.
Yes.
The bows depicted, and the Mamluk copy of the Kitab al-Wadih,
yeah.
The bows are depicted as composite bows. Now, Taibuka clearly says that you could make them as self bows out of yew, but that was for a specific reason. Use at sea, where the moisture in that would be not good for composite bows. I mean, good quality composite bows with, you know, proper finish and that would survive, but they're very expensive. It would be much better to arm your sailors with yew crossbows and spend money on composite bows, because they mightn't use them for 6 months.
Yeah.
And so you just want something that's good armor. See, the European change to steel crossbows, a lot of people say, oh, they're more powerful and everything. The real reason was you could store them for years.
Yes, that's right. It's not a question of power.
It's I mean, it's logistics. When you look at the number of arrows that we've got records from England, because the English pipe rolls survived, not all of them, but a lot of them did. And arrows were made, like small villages would be making tens of thousands of arrows. And crossbow bolts and arrows in England were shipped to France, where the English like shooting people, in barrels. So you would have barrel loads of arrows and crossbow bolts. This is like mass production, right? This is the early form of mass production. Archery is, you hear, I mean, Marco Polo describing the Mongols, for instance, said each cavalryman had 2 quivers with 30 arrows each. Half were for long distance, half were for short distance. I don't think he really knew the difference between the arrows, but he knew the concept. There's a Byzantine painting from Mount Sinai, the monastery at Mount Sinai, from I think it's the 10th century, and it shows one of these closed quivers. And in the mouth of the quiver, you can see all the arrowheads, because they were put with the knock down. And there were at least 4 or 5 different shaped arrowheads, because arrowheads were specific for their use. And you would, I mean, closed quivers are perfect. That you just look at, it's like a golfer taking out the right golf club. A number 7, perfect. Woo-hoo! But so that there's kind of specialization in the Indian illustrations. I'm working from memory here, because I was going to look them all up for you, and I'll send them to you so you'll see what I mean. There are crossbows shooting 3 arrows at once.
Wow.
Because there were siege engines that did that shot javelin-like things, but it's pretty easy to make a crossbow. And if you can load up 3 arrows and they diverge as you shoot them, you've got the beginnings of a machine gun. Now, in China, they actually had repeating crossbows.
Yes.
The earliest type that I was able to find, which is from 250 BC, it had like a pistol grip in front, and it had a rod at the back. You pulled the rod back. There was a little lug that caught the string, pulled it back. When it got almost all the way back, 2 arrows dropped into 2 channels either side. Went a little bit further, and there was a sear that caught on a bar of metal across it, which lifted the sear, which dropped the front, which allowed the thing to drop, and it shot 2 arrows at once, and you just went punch, 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 punch.
And 2 questions regarding that. The first question regarding these repeating crossbow Chinese ones. Is it true that they made them even up to the later centuries? You know, they're like...
They were making them as toys as late as the 1940s.
Exactly, that's right.
There was a shop in Beijing.
Yes.
They were used. There was the Germans, I think, took the Taku forts, which were defending the approach to the inland parts of China. And there's a photograph from the aftermath when they'd taken the forts, and there's dead bodies, and there's repeating crossbows.
They were fighting with it?
They were still fighting with them.
God.
They were not meant to shoot a long distance. What they were meant for was to deliver an enormous amount of arrows over a short distance. Often the arrows were poisoned because they were so light. So you can imagine a whole group of guys are coming through a gateway, and you've got 10 of these guys, and they empty, I don't know, I think they took 14, 15 arrows. Say 15. 150 of these arrows in 10 seconds. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. they don't have to be powerful if they're poisoned. They were actually quite thin, and they had like bodkin points. So they were designed to penetrate quite deeply, but not to cut very much or cause too much damage. They were a nuisance, but if you get a face full of them, you're not going to be able to fight. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, like English longbowmen and knights in plate armor, well, they can't penetrate the breastplate. Well, they're not going to shoot him in the breastplate, are they? They're going to wait till he lifts his visor so he can get some fresh air, and that's when they're going to shoot him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, and the other thing is, as we've discussed, one of the principles of using archery is if you've got guys in lots of armor, you want to keep them in that armor because they're getting hotter and hotter and less able to fight. So you want to make them too scared to lift their visor up.
Yeah.
And the even earlier on, when the armor wasn't as heavy or as oppressive, it's quite clear that at least one of the tactics was to shower people with arrows so they don't get a chance to rest. And, you know, you don't care if you kill them or even if you wound them, because when they're concentrating on dodging arrows, they're not concentrating on anything else. They're just trying to stay alive.
Yeah. And
with crossbows in a fortress, for instance, now remember, there's a lot of big fortresses that were built in eastern Iran. You've got Bam, you've got Balkh, you've got Herat. These are all heavily fortified. It would be advantageous to use things like crossbows. Now, a lot of the texts we have only speak of handbows, and you know, there's Fakhri Mubarak and the Shoja'i, where he describes anecdotes about sieges and things like that. And there's no mention. I couldn't find a mention of crossbows in it. There might be, but I mean, I only had the short section on archery. There could be in different places where they're talking about other bows. There's a thing in the Norasnamar, they talk about the Chachi bow.
Chachi, yes.
Which is Tashkent, right?
Yes,
but the thing is that you put a note in with the original Farsi text, and the word isn't Kaman, it's Chach.
Exactly, that's it.
Chachi.
That's it.
So I mean, this is way in the east, right?
Way in the east, yeah.
Tashkent is up in you know, is it Turkmenistan now, or is it?
Yeah,
I think it's way up there.
Yeah.
And so this is in Central Asia. So crossbows were known well enough to be quoted in a poem.
Yeah.
Actually, was that the Norris Namara? Was that the? I've got it written down. I'll send you these things, and if you want to put it in the notes.
Yes. I mean, the Tashkent in Uzbekistan, you mean, right? Bede?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Tashkent in Uzbekistan. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's Chachi.
Yes. Excuse me?
Chachi.
Chachi, exactly. That's right. That's right.
Chach.
That's right. Very.
So, I mean, this is from one end of Iran to the other. So we've got references of Timur taking crossbows to Smyrna in paintings. We've got references of Arab authors probably quoting Abbasid things about Persians and Turks making crossbows with powerful composite bows. We've got Mamluk references, technical references to crossbow construction and use. We've got Mamluk illustrations showing the crossbows they were talking about. We've got multiple names for crossbows indicating that the people at the time differentiated between Western European crossbows, North African crossbows, Middle Eastern crossbows, and Persian Turkish crossbows. So this is quite a sophisticated knowledge of crossbows. If you compare that to the number of references to, say, horn bows in Western European literature before the like 1500s, there might be 5. and they're just vague. I mean, you know, a horn bow could be a bow with a belly of horn, or it could be a bow there's horn tips, because we don't know, because they just say horn bow. It's one of the sagas, I think they mention a horn bow. Now people will say, well, the Vikings went to Constantinople, they would have seen composite bows. Maybe some brought some back. Yeah, maybe. But that to me is a justification rather than an explanation. You want to see composite bows, so you invented justification how they could get there, but you don't have any factual material about it.
Right.
The thing that really is puzzling about crossbows and Oriental crossbows in general, the two premier Plantagenet crossbow makers both had names, Peter the Saracen and somebody the Moor, which suggests that they were either from the Middle East or North Africa. But the European crossbows, the composite crossbows, are nothing like Middle Eastern composite bows at all.
Yeah, right.
So it's like they heard of the idea and built their own.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like comparing Japanese bows and archery to Chinese bows and archery. They knew each other, but the Japanese developed their own style. Yeah. They're completely original. I mean, there's shared ideas, and there were cultural influences, but there's nothing in Japanese archery that in the technical side, the physical side, the bows, the arrow design, the yugake, the glove, anything. This is all uniquely Japanese.
Yeah.
So Europe developed its own composite crossbows, possibly in reaction to Middle Eastern composite crossbows. It's hard to say. Crossbows, that if you read the old French chronicles, like Middle Ages chronicles, there's sometimes they lump archers together with crossbowmen and just say they're arbalestiers. And what they meant is missile troops.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
They both shot arrows. Some shot short arrows, some shot long arrows. Because if you're a knight or a monk or something, well, it's not very important to you. That's what the common people do, not us. Those Italian guys we pay to do it, yeah, they do that. They're very good at it, you know, but they get in the way sometimes. This is the problem when only part of the populace is literate and they have vested interests. I mean, I don't know what, I haven't seen any really good studies of what the literacy levels were in the Middle East, but there was a strong, particularly in Muslim society, a strong desire to learn the Quran.
Yes.
And that promoted the idea of literacy as being a good thing. I mean, many people learn it off by heart. Hafiz.
Yes, exactly. Yes, right.
And I mean, and it was popular not just in Arabic-speaking countries, it was popular everywhere there was Islam. But on the other hand, there was this interest in text, in writing, and it was because there wasn't a priestly caste like there was in Europe. It wasn't a caste, but it was separate from general society. Then, you know, people learned to read and write, probably not to the level we would think normal. But if everybody else has got 2% literate and you've got 5% literate, you're doing well.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that in the Middle East, archers were often literate because books on archery are written by archers, yes, not by, like the Le Livre de Roy Modus, which is a medieval French manuscript on hunting, has descriptions of archery from the point of view of a nobleman who gets handed his bow by one of his footmen and shoots a deer. The first English book on archery was written by the Latin tutor of Elizabeth I, Roger Aitken. He was a classical scholar. If you read Toxophilus, bear in mind, he called it in Greek, archery, bow lover, Toxophilus. It's all full of classical references. There are descriptions of how to draw the bow and how to pick a good bow and, you know, all this kind of stuff. He was an archer. He actually taught her to shoot, they say. But this is in the 1500s before anything's written on archery in English.
Fascinating.
I mean, you know, it's because the typical English archer was a normal person, not a person that had been educated. I wouldn't be surprised if quite a few monks took up archery because it's a good exercise, but they didn't write about it because it was inappropriate. So what we've got is we've got quite a lot. I mean, you and I have worked on, you translated on help with 8 Persian manuscripts.
Yeah.
Now, you've told me that there are lots more.
Yeah, many more.
But in Europe, no. There's some writings about crossbows, but not a lot. And again, the person shooting the crossbow doesn't know how it works. A mechanic makes the crossbow for him.
Yes.
He learned how to aim and pull the trigger, and he's probably got a servant to wind up the windlass or the whatever, the string. This I'm talking about in the 15th, 16th centuries for hunting crossbows. I'm not talking about it in war. This is whereas Taibuka, who was a professional soldier, talks about nut design because it's, you know, like he's involved in his weapons.
That's right.
And the Persian manuscripts, they vary from Omar Khayyam, where he describes different kinds of bows. Now we know they're crossbows because bows of the weight, he puts them into 2 classes.
Yes.
What was it? It's 250 to something man, and then from something man to a huge. These have to be crossbows.
Yes.
And the 2 classes exactly correspond to the German Rüstung and Halbrüstung. Sorry about I'm bad with the umlauts.
No problem.
I can't get my views right. So this is back in the 1000s in Khorasan. Here he is writing about classes of crossbow. Also, there are mangonels in there, like ballista type weapons, which may be bow powered or they may be torsion powered. Not enough detail, but what is quite clear, he's got a range that could be a hand bow, 50 to 150 man, then 150 to 250, the Halbrüstung type, which he calls something that means half bow or half power, and then the full powered ones, 250 to 500 or something like that. Now these are, well, the top range had to have some kind of mechanical thing to draw the bows. The middle range may have been, if they were long draw bows, may have been able to be drawn by 2 feet and 2 hands, or a hook on the belt and 1 foot in the stirrup. Hard to say. It depends on the draw length, because the longer draw length means more movement from the archer, but more efficiency for the bow. The shorter draw length means more convenience for the archer, but a less efficient bow that's not going to be as good.
Bede, I have